Hi, welcome to Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness with your hosts, Chris Noble and Bill Prodsman. In today's episode, we're talking about how music was used in ancient times, the multiple purposes in which the ancients used music not only to entertain, but of course to heal, to uplift human consciousness, and so much more. We'll be looking at bizarre instruments found in deep antiquity as well as modern times, the weird sounds they produce, how they're built, and the potential functionality of these bizarre, weird instruments. We'll also be examining ancient chants like the Om and the amazing effects it has on the human body still to this very day. We'll be discussing these topics and much, much more, as always, in our open conversations here on Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness. I think it's great because I'm really pumped to talk about ancient history any time of the day. I love my ancient mysteries, ancient anomalies, history, ancient mysteries of the past. But I think when it comes to music and sound, there's a real misconception. I think people assume that music started off primitive, kind of like how everything we assume in history starts off primitive, simple, and then becomes more complex, more evolved in time. And that simply isn't the case with a lot of things in history, and that definitely includes music and sound healing. Because if you look, I mean, not even that recently, Bill, you're very much an expert in this area, is look at classical music and then look at our pop music now.
Yes.
You know, what is more complex, right? The thing that was 300 years ago is far more complex, right? But then if we go further
you
back,
mean like rhythmically and melodically and just all of that?
I think in every aspect, really. Rhythmically, melodically. I also feel like, I mean, they messed around more with the tuning, the concert pitch tunings.
Yes.
Back in the day as well. So they're playing with like actual frequency, pitch modulation, and then the intention, right? We've talked about this many times, like the intention for those hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, writing and performing music. I mean, we both know is a lot different than sometimes a lot of people these days. The intention behind the writing and the performing of music now.
So let me ask a question, because this may lead the conversation a little bit, but you're the one who's going to know the answer, right, Chris? So in the day when music was first ever, whenever that was, what was its purpose? Like the original purpose of sound and rhythm?
Right. I mean, definitely there's no specific answer that we could, I think, tangibly all agree on, because we simply don't know. Unless we time travel back to, well, when were we first, in terms of anthropology, well, they'll say we're about 200 to 250,000 years old as a species, right? We've been the exact same, physically speaking. We would look identical 250,000 years ago as we do today. Our brain hasn't changed. All of that's the same. So since the inception of the human species, we've been making music because it feels like, as long as we've been human, we've been musical to some degree. We seem to have had this genetic makeup that allows us to create art and to create rhythm, to find kind of meaning and understanding through rhythm and melody. And I would guess, because I'm definitely speculating here, but my speculation would be that we used music as communication, as a form of communication from one person to another before language was even perhaps established.
You mean just like person to person, or the long distance things like those skulls that they've found in Northern Europe, where the vocal cavity is so enormous that the sound that would have produced could have gone for long distances, like much longer than now.
Exactly, right? Like it's to communicate back and forth. Maybe it was to communicate in a more primal way, if there was a threat, to scare away the threat. But of course, then there's also to call in people, to call in your tribe or people from far away, to project your voice as like a beacon, right? To communicate with people. But then when rhythm kind of kicks in, you start to, of course, think of drumming, right? Banging rocks on trees or vice versa, and creating some form of rhythm and some form of a drum, right? Which then evolves into, animal skins getting stretched over wood.
Sure.
Right. And dried out and then used as a drum and stuff like that. But almost immediately when that starts to happen, and there's a really phenomenal, interesting branch of research into ancient psychedelics as well that kind of goes with this, which is they were drumming, and they were usually drumming around a fire a lot of the time, or in caves, but fire and drumming were very, rhythm and fire and ceremony seem to be very common. And then you have to ask the questions, okay, outside of maybe survival purposes and basic communication, what else were they using music for, right? And I would say that the first ever shamanic experiences were very likely induced with some form of music, maybe also some local psychedelics that would literally be picked out of the ground, like mushrooms, for example, eaten, and then a trip would happen. And I'm sure, again, we were just as smart as we are today as we were 250,000 years ago. So we would have figured out that if we had an incredible mushroom experience by picking a random mushroom off the ground and having the psychedelic experience, then we would find that same mushroom to induce the same experience. So there's Terence McKenna and there's other researchers who are proposing, it's quite a modern new theory, that psychedelics played an integral role in the evolution of the human species to bring us into a more civilized species. And this would have happened in the very beginning when people were, drumming and whatnot around fires in a more primitive type of culture. So music goes right there with it. So I would say it's like maybe survival, basic communication, but then the third component would be some form of shamanic experience. The early versions of that, at least. That's just my 2 cents.
The spiritual experience would have been valuable. So for anyone who's had a psychedelic experience, I haven't had the one on mushrooms. There's a sense of being uninhibited, of allowing myself to be out of control in a sense, not so I don't have my hands on all the levers. I'm willing to let myself go into this place. And the fact that there's music associated with that, to me anyway, says, hey, I've got my music. I can hang on to my music as sort of an anchor, like a place where I can remember whatever the melody is. Maybe I'm chanting as I'm having this ancient psychedelic experience, that the melody is grounding me, reminding me that I'm still here. I'm on Earth, even as I have the expansion of consciousness. Is that your sense of history around this stuff, or am I just sort of making that up out of whole cloth?
Well, we don't know. That's the thing, is like I can't say this with any certainty, just as much as like the leading historians can say this, because we have some forms of evidence, but that evidence is constantly changing. I mean, we're uncovering so much. I mean, on the historical side of things, what we have just started to realize is that if we actually look underwater for archaeology, we're going to find way more than when we're looking, well, not way more, but we're going to find a heck of a lot of it underwater, because not only 10,000, 12,000, 12,000 years ago was the end of the last ice age. And our sea levels rose by about 200 feet very, very rapidly, very quickly. There was a very rapid melting. Theories are that it was an asteroid impact or a solar flare. But regardless, we have ice core samples from Greenland that we can date. There's incredible drilling that they do, and they drill out this ice, and you can see lines through the spherical, cylindrical piece of ice. And you can date, and you can also find like so much information of what was going on planet Earth at different points in history. So we know through that there was a massive cataclysm that happened 12,000 years ago. And so with that in mind, sea levels rose about 200 feet, meaning every coastal city went underwater. And where do we build most of our major cities? Right near the water. Right. On the water. So we're looking at almost every major infrastructure and city and piece of construction and architecture from perhaps an ancient world of humans that we have lost, like in Atlantis per se. And that's all underwater. So we might find so much more evidence for how how music was used at very ancient times. It could have been used for crazy things like not just healing, but also music and sound could have been used for levitation. I mean, we see, if you go onto YouTube and you literally type in acoustic levitation, you can see this happening. It's amazing to see like a little ball of foam get vibrated by 2 speakers, or actually 4 speakers placed evenly. And the frequencies that they pump are the same. And it's the resonant frequency of this little ball. And all of a sudden this ball is like, boom, pops in the air and starts to levitate. So, I mean, who knows what we were using them for. But I'd say at the end of the day, when you kind of dial it back, you made a good point, Bill, which was, even in the beginning of it all, what if it's just an innate thing for you to hum a melody, a random melody, just to feel good, just to feel safe and secure,
Sure.
Did we probably do that at the beginning? I don't know. Probably, right?
I mean, we have this ability to make the sound. I would love to be able to study languages someday and figure out how all that happened. But we have a fairly evolved capability to make language happen, to make sound happen. Clearly, there are birds and stuff who sing, and we are way beyond some of their abilities when it comes to melodic capability and speed and all of that. They're infinitely better at it than we are. But given this ability that we have, stuff doesn't evolve unless there's a purpose for it. So, language is relatively recent, I guess, given 12,000 years of history or so. Writing, of course, comes with that. But to be able to sing, and it's fairly basic. You don't have to make any consonant sounds. You can make melodic sounds or just toning sounds without a whole lot of ability. It just seems to me as we're talking here, and maybe I'm way off on this, but it's like that crazy movie Stargate, right? There's a universe on each side of the Stargate. It seems to me that music is the Stargate between the physical lived experience and whatever else there is on the other side.
I like that. That's really cool.
Right? And you can get there just by humming a tune. You can change your emotions by humming a tune, or even remembering a tune. They're figured out now. Like just remembering, I don't know why this came to mind, but the music from 2001, right? The Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
What is it? Also Sprach Zarathustra, but that wonderful, right? And you just remembering that gives me the chills. I don't know why. Richard Strauss, right? There's other things that do that for me too. And I was, as you were talking about making drums and things, we've been making instruments for a long time. And, there are made up instruments these days. People are making instruments that literally just blow my mind. Yeah. Make sounds that are completely spiritual. I mean,
what are some of your favorites, Bill, instrument wise, come across?
Well, there's a guy who took piano strings, like bass piano strings, and made a frame for them. It takes a lot of tension to hold a string like that in tune, and then amplified that. So imagine that you had like a bass guitar the size of a concert grand piano. I don't know, 9-foot long strings, really long strings.
Wow. With
pickups, and then modulated that. So you can make this incredible sound out of piano strings that you couldn't hear any other way, just using basic electronics.
That's so cool.
It'd be like having an acoustic grand piano with a pedal board. I mean, basically. And that's not even that far of a made up instrument. There's all the folks who are sampling instruments. Got a buddy who samples his viola and puts it through a whole bunch of stuff and does a lot of looping and things like that. But the sounds that he can get out of a viola are remarkable. They're just remarkable, And yeah, a lot of it is processed, but why not, right? And we've all heard of Tuvan throat singers being able to sing more than one tone at a time and put that in a cavern. You get resonance, and then you get overtones and barbershop quartets. So there's like these physical made-up instruments in addition to the really weird ones that people are making. Huge, enormous drums. Can you? What would you do with a 10-foot drum or something like that, right?
What does that sound like, too?
Right? Or the big gongs and the bells that they have. I mean, you can see the people just going, "Oh, if we made it bigger, right?" And then they go to the bronze casting place, wherever it is in ancient history, and say, "Well, I want to make one that's 5 times as big as the last one you made," and everybody rolls their eyes. And a year later, they come back with this giant bell, right? So that this drive we have to make new sounds and invent new ways of making them, and it seems like that's part of it too. Like along with language, we started to build things that made weird sounds, right, happen. and why not?
Why not, right? That's how instruments are created.
A lot of it isn't mainstream, but you've seen the pictures of the guy standing on a ladder to play the world's largest saxophone or whatever it is.
I love that. I love it.
Right?
Oh my God.
But the sounds of, I don't know, ship engines or whatever. There's methods in the madness. We've all seen the tractor video where the tractor is basically the old-fashioned tractor. Click, 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 click. It's the percussion beat behind the
Oh, cool.
bluegrass band, right? So
Right.
this is something that's been something that we do, I guess, for a long, long time. I mean, people looking for new ways to resonate. What about you? What's your favorite weird instrument that you've seen? I mean, I love the bass piano string. That one just
That's
gets
cool. I love
sounds
that.
so amazing. It's like
I'm trying to picture that.
it's the
Yeah.
voice of God. It really is.
Honestly, that's really cool. I remember going on a rampage many, many years ago to look at just utterly bizarre instruments that are out there. I think it was for a film I was working on, and I ended up finding some incredible things. So one of them was it was called a Carnex, I think is how you pronounce it, and it's like a battle horn from the Viking days. And so this is a very old instrument, and it was like it it's played like a trumpet, but only in the sense that it's like it's a brass instrument. It's a trumpet type of thing, but instead of how most trumpets, they're like it's a horizontal instrument. You put the mouthpiece to your mouth, and then the instrument expands outward from there. The
Yeah.
Carnix has a mouthpiece that goes onto your mouth, but then it immediately makes a 90-degree angle upwards, and then just shoot, and then the instrument is just above your head. So when you're kind of playing and then like balancing this weird horn well above your head, and then it's got this big, big sort of end to it, I guess. I don't know my terminology with brass instruments that well, but anyway.
Was it meant to be a weapon?
Well, it was meant to be extremely intimidating, because if you YouTube this, and you'll hear a lot of the high pitched parts of it, and it sounds like a ceremonial trumpet, but then it can play, because it's such a big instrument, if you kind of like play it less melodically, and I've heard it played with this weird like low drone sound.
Yeah.
It sounds like the gates of hell were opened up.
Right.
And it's bone chilling. And so they would play this in before a battle would ensue, to intimidate their opponents with other intimidation tactics too, because I know the Vikings were terrifying. And so I was imagining these Vikings with the sound of this Carnix playing, and I'm like, yep, that's bone chilling. It was perfect for the film I was working on. That's why I found it. But it was a sound that, like you said, with these piano strings, you're like, what? I've never heard anything like that.
Right.
And then on the flip side of that, I came across a beautiful instrument that is, it's like a cylindrical piece of glass that rotates, and water is dripped over top of it in a continuous fashion. So it's always lubricated essentially, and the glass is rotating on its own, and you put your hands on it like to play a piano, except you're playing rotating glass.
Oh, like the people who use crystal glasses of different sizes.
Exactly. Sounds very similar to that, but played in a piano setting rather than having a bunch of crystal glasses. And it does sound different too. It has even more angelic, you like otherworldly, like it sounds like an alien kind of instrument, really, more than anything, right?
Like a real theremin.
Yeah, like a real theremin, like a whoa, 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 kind of like very like it's like glass singing, right? Like what does that even sound like? But it's I mean, people can YouTube these instruments, and you can type it in more, because I don't even know the name of that thing, but you just type in like, glass resonant instrument cylinder or something, and you'll find whatever that thing is. And so that was like the most angelic, beautiful sounding thing, because you have water too, so you're incorporating the element of water with your music and the sound. So, oh my God, it was beautiful. It was stunning.
I've got a great affinity for comedic instruments like the Spike Jones trombone, or whatever it was called. Sounds like a garden hose. And everything that Peter Schickele has ever done as PDQ Bach, and the concerto for typewriter and orchestra. I mean, there's so much that you can make actually fairly beautiful music with, if you try, at least music for a purpose. Because Spike Jones could be beautiful, but this drive we have is somehow, when it comes to humor anyway, for me, transcendent.
Yeah.
Because humor is, who is it that said humor is a spiritual weapon or something? Maybe I'm quoting that wrong. But there's like power in humor that doesn't exist any other way. And if you're using it for a purpose other than just to make people laugh, dare I mention Dave Chappelle and the whole trans thing, but he's trying to teach there.
Mm.
And humor is like the way that you get the gates open. Mark Twain, pick any satirist from way back, they all
Yeah.
have this ability to make us laugh. But musical humor does that as well. If you're talking about Tom Lehrer or whatever, they're using regular instruments for the most part. Victor Borg, remember that
Thank
guy?
you, Victor Borg. There's one guy I was trying to think of, and he's hilarious piano player,
Hilarious.
right? But he's a virtuoso, which is so fun to watch.
Yeah. And I mean, pushing the limit in a new way, right?
Mm-hmm.
With music. And it does give you insight, especially things like, every song sounds like Happy Birthday, which it doesn't, but he makes it sound like that.
That's hilarious. I love that. That's really hard to do.
Just went out.
No,
my headset went out. Keep talking.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's with comedy and music. It's so amazing. I've done some comedy short films, and writing the music for them is sometimes it can be more challenging than writing the music for a scary scene or a sad scene, because how do you make something funny? Like you would think, oh, I'll just put silly instruments. You're like, yeah, but it has to suit the scene. It has to suit the tone of the film. So just because slapstick kind of comedic music for Looney Tunes doesn't mean it's going to work for everything, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to try to find humor in music, and sometimes I find a lot of the time it's the articulation of the instrument, like the way you play it is funny rather than the notes itself. Sometimes,
yes.
Like we always know the classic kind of humor sounds with the trumpet, like wah, 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 or whatever, like very iconic sounds, right? But it's
plunger.
Yeah, the plunger, but it's how it's performed, right? It's all those like sort of pitch bending and making things kind of sound like they're out of tune almost, just to create that humor. It's funny. It sounds silly. So it's amazing, again, the power that we have of like, what if, again, bringing it back to when humans were first humans and we were creating music, maybe it was for such a variety of things, and we weren't consciously trying to do it for those reasons. We just made a silly sound, and then our friend looked over and said, and started to laugh at the silly sound we made, and then they made a silly sound, and then you just have two humans laughing at each other, making silly sounds with each other. I mean, is that so crazy to think? I don't know, right? Like,
have you ever taken a blade of grass and held it between your thumbs and created a reed that you can blow and make a whistling sound?
Yeah, definitely.
That for me was such a revelation. I don't remember how old I was. My parents showed me how to do that. But to be able to create an instrument from a blade of grass, it's like, wow. And then, of course, there's people who can whistle really loud through their teeth or whatever makes that happen. And I think the variety that must have existed in the ancient world of sounds, like if you could think about an orchestra today or putting together a band of ancient instruments just from what you find lying around in the forest, what would that be like? It's pretty clever to have all this technology and stuff, but if you're talking about, we all know about banging on logs, but what other instruments are available to the 12,000 BCE kind of person who wanted to make some music?
I agree, right? And I'll just use as almost a fantasy pop culture reference with Lord of the Rings, and it's not a real life thing, but it's a good example of like what could have happened in the past. And I remember in the second film or the second book, when the Battle of Helm's Deep, there's this huge refuge that the Rohirrim go to save their people, and so they all escape to this place called Helm's Deep, and there's this massive horn that it's like the horn of I know these movies so well. Anyway, the horn of Helm Hammerhand or something, and I think it's what it's called. And Gimli plays it as the Gandalf and or whatever. Aragorn ride out to meet the orcs and to meet their death, so to speak. And it's this epic scene. But anyway, this horn is probably like 300 feet long. It's played at the top of this tower, and the actual end of the horn is at the bottom of the fort, and this fort's huge.
Yeah.
So we're talking like it's a 300-foot high horn. And I know this isn't a fantasy film, but you got to imagine that why wouldn't stuff like this have likely been built in the past, especially if it was metal? I mean, through time, like that's what gets worn down and also usually melted by other cultures later, thousands of years later. And that's why you don't see it anymore. But it could have very well have existed. Things of that nature. Like you could probably have had I mean, just imagine, right? With like the types of instruments that would have been built in the very, very distant past. Maybe they're using crystal energy. We've talked about this before with the energy of crystals. Why couldn't the crystals be powering up some form of crystalline instrument? I mean, how cool would that be?
I'm thinking back in the day. So Bach came back into my awareness today, but when he was around, some poor schmo had to pump the organ. And if it was a big organ, there'd be a bunch of them actually like doing the bicycle pedal thing somewhere to make the air to power the pipe organ to, so you could hear this whole thing go. And so that's sort of mechanical technology, but why not crystals? And why not, we had bellows a long time ago. Why not a bunch of people like super bellowing into a mega Carnex or Carnex?
Right. I don't even know how it's pronounced, but it's, yeah.
And why not? Because,
why not?
Sound is scary. And the bigger the sound you can make, the more intimidating you can be.
I mean, they talk about bringing down the walls of Jericho.
Yep.
With sound, with a tremendous sound. Could have been the Ark of the Covenant. Could have been a weapon that emitted a frequency or something. I mean, who knows? There's lots of speculation there, but it talks about it as sound brought it down.
Yeah.
And the military today uses what's called Caesar technology, same as laser, except it's focused sound.
Yep.
This isn't even classified. It's obviously all like common, like you can research all this stuff online, but I mean, we weaponize sound. And we also, I mean, we do it for so many things. I just can't imagine that in the distant past, like we had many, many different moments in history where instruments would be used for such a massive variety, of things, whether it's warfare or healing, the complete opposite.
I'm speculating here completely, but given the fact that as far back as Socrates, anyway, there's actual writing complaining about teenagers and their music. It seems to me that the evolution of music might have been the evolution of our culture. So everybody is around the fire chanting one note, right? And beating the drum once every time they chant the note. And some teenager somewhere with their friends are beating the drums twice and chanting two notes. And that's like, oh my God, that's anathema, because all the parents are like, no, we can't have that. That's, that's terrible. They're messing it all up.
Yep.
And in fact, what they're doing is they're evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how that works in the modern age, but I mean, seriously, have you heard some of the amazing music that's being made these days?
Fantastic.
Pop music, okay, that's fine, but you take it down a layer, and even in some of the just below the level of pop places, there are people playing like guitar solos that would be equally acceptable in the jazz context as they are in the just below the pop context.
Yeah.
Like playing completely out and sounding amazing. It's like, whoa, that would have never happened in the 60s. And yet here we are, right? So
I mean, people always would, I've heard a lot of complaints from people in the past of, music's gotten worse, it's not as good as it used to be. And I always kind of laugh at that, because I'm like, I definitely would disagree with that. There's always incredible art and music, always, like, because we're always creative beings, and there's always reasons to create, and whether or not it's maybe hitting the mainstream is another.
Yeah, but who cares about the mainstream? Because it's on the edge. It's like in the third standard deviation where stuff changes first, right? Wow. So we really got away from ancient history, but I think that you're right about the cyclical thing. Like we made all this civilization, and then every ocean in the world rose 200 feet and drowned it all. And now we're building it again, in time for the next cataclysmic event.
Right. Or massive evolution where we go to multiple planets and transcend that cycle of cataclysm. But
which of course, leaves me wondering a little bit, because there's no like atmosphere out there in space. How do we do music in a place where vibration that we can hear doesn't exist?
I still think, and like I'm a musician here, so I'm speaking like I have, like I'm some scientist here. I'm not, but from what I've read and accumulated with my knowledge, is that we still don't fully understand space, first and foremost, right? Like we don't even know what makes 94% of the mass of the entire universe. So
exactly, I'm down with that.
Right, we don't know. So assuming space is a vacuum, and assuming that there's no sound heard in space, Now, I know that's what astronauts experience when they're around Earth and whatnot, but is it all the exact same everywhere in the solar system and the galaxy? I don't know. I mean, do we really have experiential data for that? No, it's all speculation, right? So, so music could, for all we know, travel. For example, we've got that probe that we sent out with who was a part of that?
It was a Viking with the gold disc on it.
Correct. Who did that one? Very famous.
I want to say Carl Sagan. Is that
yes,
right?
Carl Sagan. Thank you. Yeah, Carl Sagan did that. So, and one of the things they put was, I think they put the Canadian pianist Glenn Gould on.
Yes, playing Bach.
And some other stuff too. I think some old blues and some other genres. But they're playing music out on this thing because that's a huge part of what we are. It represents, obviously there's other art forms, but in terms of this, this probe, that it was the easiest thing for them to just have music playing on top of some other, visual diagrams and things like that. And so what's really, really interesting is that then, if they were playing music out on this probe and they knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, then why would they do it? So I think there's, enough scientists that think that still has its vibration, its sound, it's going to go somewhere. It's going to, it can still be picked up by another being or entity. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. And plus, who knows what would happen on other planets playing music, but I have a sneaky suspicion, I could go into I have a sneaky suspicion that other beings, extraterrestrials on other planets, are also playing music and have some form of art. I just don't think it's a exclusive to human thing. I think it's when you become a more evolved being like a human, the arts, music, that just becomes a form of expression. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe
I have to agree with that. Yeah, because communication would be an essential for people. I mean, we're not at a place yet where we read each other's minds, but communication in a basic sense is music.
Right. And you get feeling. Like I tell people, or I love when I'm working with film and like directors and stuff, I get to be the music of emotion I get to be the language of emotion, and when we're getting dialing back to the beginning of humanity, what's a great way to convey how you feel before you have language? Maybe kind of like humming a sad tune, and mixed with your body language,
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds silly, but like when, think about this, like when you're in another country and you can't, and let's take out of the equation Google Translate and, the wonderful apps we have now for translation, like rewind a decade or two when we didn't have that. And we were traveling around and trying to connect with people, trying to communicate with people. What do? You end up using body language is a big one. I find when you don't speak the same language, you end up having to really kind of play charades in a way.
Yeah.
So charades becomes, number one form of communication. And I would see this a lot when I was, in places in Africa and, China and, where there was just no way in how these people are going to speak a lick of English. And that was fine. But how am I going to communicate? Well, body language and sound. And when I say sound, I'd be like, I would use my pitch, to convey the emotion. So if I was really, I'm like, yeah, that over there, that looks really good. Thank you. Yeah, great. They can't understand the words, but that, no, yeah, like that kind of frequency, they can kind of understand mixed with my body language. He wants that one right there. Okay, cool. We'll grab him that piece of food or whatever he's asking for. Right. So yes. I remember once in France having to communicate with a bakery owner about what kind of sandwich I wanted. And so I ended up, I just wasn't in France because I can speak French, but it was in Spain. And I ended up, I wanted a chicken sandwich. So I started going, bok, 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 so, and he got it. Like, it sounds silly, but you're like, but the communication was successful because he understood exactly what I meant by that. So
you were able to find a common language that both of you understood.
And the sound of a chicken is a universal sound.
Right. Laughter, of course, is another one of those things.
Exactly. And laughter has its own tone and frequency and kind of almost musicality to it as well.
And so does crying, keening,
Absolutely.
There's the basics around this stuff would have informed ancient musicians, I'm sure. To be able to convey joy, to be able to convey sorrow, uh, anger, fear,
Mm.
um, pretty powerful ways of being able to do that are pretty basic to an understanding of civilization.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. Like basic, but here's another really crazy thought is, so when you go really far back into music history and just history in general, you've got, I remember this in university being taught, like the furthest back we can go in kind of, let's call it Western music, is the Gregorian chant.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Gregorian chants, for those listening, is basically, it sounds like old church music. It's usually mostly sung by men because that was just the way it was at that time. But obviously that doesn't matter. It's more the form of the music is what's a Gregorian chant, which is like these very long syllables are held for a long time, sometimes like a minute or more. And it's got that kind of like core, like or whatever, like that kind of almost a mystical sort of vibe to that music. But it's actually gorgeous, beautiful music. If you're curious, definitely YouTube that. But what I think is really interesting about that is then when you go into ancient Indian music and the Vedas, and how like languages like Sanskrit is one of the oldest languages on the planet. You look into that music, which is even older than Gregorian chants. It's probably thousands of years older than that. And not only is the music still very complex, but also has the same effect of the Gregorian chants in the sense of it's very mystical, it's very spiritual, it feels very meditative. And it kind of alters your state of consciousness when you listen to it. It's got that otherworldly kind of feel to it. And then to add on to that with ancient Indian music, they're using Sanskrit, and Sanskrit is a language that was based way more off of tonality and sound. It's the sound of, much like ancient Hebrew, it's the sound of the words that is almost more important than the word itself, because it's the sound that it creates that is supposed to be representative of the meaning of it. So it's going far more than just like constructing a language to create meaning. It's going, no, the language itself, the sound of the language is the meaning. And that's my very crude understanding of Sanskrit. I'm sure much better experts can speak to that, but that's kind of what I've been able to learn about it, which is kind of crazy because it's a language based off of sound and vibration, which is why they still include these ancient Sanskrit mantras in a lot of modern meditations and things like that, because they recognize that this language is not only just, because the words, I don't understand Sanskrit, I don't know what they're saying, but the sound of these words is activating. There's something going on there where you're like, whoa, I mean, I feel different when I listen to Sanskrit.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't know what's going on there, but it's weird because we go really far back into history and things get almost more complex and then mystical and have a more spiritual consciousness altering quality to it.
I think we need to talk about universal melodies someday, like the Dies Irae and some of the Sanskrit and the Gregorian chant. And because I know there have been times where I've recognized something like at a really fundamental levels. I've never heard the music before, but something about it, just like, I know this, like it gets into you. First time I heard Icaros, I felt that. And I can't tell you why, and I can't tell you where it's from or anything, but somebody somewhere has done the work on this. And we should probably get into that because, like you, who is it that's the amazing singer that has taken a lot of those Sanskrit melodies and sort of westernized them with, I don't know, backing vocals and sort of chords that normal people would understand rather than being out there? I want to say Ram Dass, but I don't think that's it. It's somebody else.
Yeah, he's done some really amazing collaborations, but there's other people for sure. I can't think of names right now, but I know
those melodies, like the melody of the Gregorian chant, like the first time that I heard that outside the university in an actual Catholic church, I was blown away. It's like, wow, okay, I get it now. This is where that melody belongs, right? And I don't know what they were saying. It was Latin, but the melody somehow fit the environment in a way that was transportive. And I think that's the same with the Sanskrit melodies you're talking about. Those sort of fit the need that we feel for reaching to the other, finding new depth. It's got to be that way worldwide in musical sort of traditions. And isn't the Chinese language a very musical language? And the actual pitch that you choose for a given syllable in a given word is very meaningful versus if you'd chosen a different pitch. And only people who grew up in China can actually hit those pitches because their ears are sensitive enough to know. So good luck for me ever speaking Chinese, right? But
Well, yeah.
it's so important. What you've said, I think, is just crucial because it's the sound that is the meaning.
Yeah. Well, just like we have that, Om, the sound of creation, the Om. And if anyone listening, if you've never, YouTube Om, and I think you can spell it OHM, but either way, or OM, either or. And you just type that into YouTube, take a listen to that. But when you actually make that sound, and then if you make it with even one other person or two other people, if you have two other people, there's three of you, that's really powerful. And then of course, the more, the merrier, but do an Om, and an Om literally would just be like, Om, and you just draw out that syllable for as long as you can.
As long as you got breath.
And then
start again.
And then start again, rinse and repeat, just do it again and again, and see how you feel after 3, 5, 10, 15 rounds of that. And I absolutely guarantee you will feel different. You'll feel changed. Your state of consciousness will be altered to some degree. And if you've done it with other people, I would love to see what their reactions are, because every time I've done it with people who have never done an Om before, and even if they have, it always blows their mind. I mean, it's doing something. What? I don't know. I would love to find out more what it's doing. But I know some of the more profound meditation experiences I've ever had, we started off the experience before meditating with an Om, and it was a group Om. We would hold hands. I remember very specifically once in South Africa, we went to this beautiful ancient stone circle ruin. Cool. Yeah, it was amazing. It's called Adam's Calendar, just 2.5 hours out of Johannesburg area. And it's absolutely stunning. And anyway, it's an ancient site, and it's kind of like a smaller version of Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, we knew this was a special spot. I'd been researching this for some time. And before we went in, it was a group of us that were very intentional in being there. And so we all held hands, and you actually do it, I think it's your right hand up and your left hand down to receive. And everyone does that. So you're all giving and receiving, creating a electrical circuit in a way, energy circuit that way through everyone holding hands. And then you all Om together, and you don't even have to hit the same note. And luckily we had a couple of musical people with us, so we actually could hear some harmonies forming.
Nice.
Which was really fun. But long and the short of it is that set us into a real specific state of consciousness. We walked into the circle and immediately fell silent because it's got its own kind of energy going there. I don't know, again, what it's doing, but there's some earth energies happening that we don't understand, because it made all of us quiet immediately. Not on purpose. We weren't told to be quiet. We just stopped speaking because it was just something sacred going on. And we all found our spot and had moments. And everyone, I think, wept at one point or another. People had profound experiences. I had like some sort of godlike source energy voice speaking to me at one point in my meditation. And I was crying too. And it was an incredible experience, but it really went back to not only this Om that we did that created it, but there was a moment during this meditation, I just remember right now, or a good friend of mine, she's an art therapist, and she's got her PhD in art therapy. So she studies this to a really amazing degree. And she started playing her ceremonial flute. She's got a beautiful wooden indigenous flute from somewhere in the States. And oh my God, this flute was, again, because it was designed by a culture that had different intentions, had very sacred and spiritual intentions behind this instrument and behind the music. I guarantee you that also added into this effect that I know when she started playing that, like, it sent me off into another whole, realm of healing and expansion. So there's something going on there, because that was an experience that I had. And I knew that experience was a timeless human experience, because I was in a rock circle enclosure, again, a much smaller version than Stonehenge, but just imagine that, right? So we're talking, this is old. This is a very old tradition here. This is thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And yet we did it in a crude fashion, in a probably much more misunderstood way, but we did the best we could with what we had. And I had one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life there. And so
Yeah.
what did we do? We did an intentional Om. We created sound, vibration, frequency. And then we went into meditation in a sacred site with some special earth energies going on. And then a flute was added in. So music was added in and intention was added in. So all that combined created a really amazing experience that I know our ancients would have experienced, oh man, like all the time, I feel like.
Yeah. It's just whenever.
It's like that's a Friday night.
Definitely. I think Om is vastly underrated in the West. People know about it, but until you've done it, there's nothing else that combines breath work and intention and clearing of the mind while still being active, and just like everything that you all hope for when you're doing yoga, to prepare for meditation, which is, I'm told, how it's supposed to be done.
Okay.
Takes place when you sing the Om. And you don't have to be like sitting still. It's kind of nice if you're in a holy place, but you can sing the Om in the car and have the same kind of beneficial effects that are appropriate for the car that you'd get if you were singing the Om with Chris in the circle, of stones. And it's just such a fantastic thing, highly underrated. I first heard somebody explain it. I think Joe Campbell is who I listened to the very first time that somebody really explained Om to me. And it's a great touchstone. Wherever you are, to be able to sing with your family, sing with your significant other, whatever it is, what is it? The sound of all the vowels are in Om, right? Oh, I, Om. If I did that right, I don't know, but that's the idea. And it's all the sounds we can make in one note, right? Just
the sound of creation.
Opening. The sound of creation.
Sound of creation, which is interesting that it's every vowel we can make that comprises and creates the sound of creation. Like is it coincidence that those are the vowels we have, the only vowels? I don't know.
He shoots, he scores. Yes.
I did it.
But right?
I don't know, right? It's interesting.
I wish we could make the Om like nobody's sampled it yet. There must be a keyboard someplace that's got Om sampled in somewhere. I'm sure. Right? I would love to be able to play like the piano with all the notes tuned to Om.
That'd be a really cool idea for an electronic dance song. I might have to work on there, Bill. Thanks for the inspiration there.
Sure, anytime. Yeah.
I was just in a incense. I was at a store that's selling incense. It was an Indian-run store, and I could see on the wall this like, I'm blanking on the name. I just asked the gentleman too. Damn, but it was like a sitar, but a much smaller version of sitar.
Okay.
And you can see how very intricately tuned these instruments are. You have these larger bass strings that go all the way down the neck, and those are tuned, I think 4 or 5 at the end there. And then you had like 6 other strings that were tuned kind of in the middle of the guitar. Sort of how there's the banjo has like 1 string.
Yeah, that one and outlier.
That outlier. Well, it wasn't quite like that. There was like 6 others on this instrument. So it's kind of like a sort of like a modified banjo sitar thing going on there. And I didn't, it looked like an antique. I didn't want to play it or anything because I'd probably break it. But you look at those instruments and the overtones that those would create. There's no wonder that, especially with Indian music, like why when the Beatles went to India, like they immediately became mystical people. They immediately started, studying transcendental meditation. The song Dear Prudence and that whole album was written when they were studying transcendental meditation, and Prudence was one of their yoga instructors, apparently.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of, when I look at the instruments of that culture in particular, and they're not the only ones, there's many other cultures like this, but I just think of that and like the way those instruments are created to create those overtones and those very etheric, mystical sort of sounds. I keep like blanking on the right words to use for this, but it literally alters your state of consciousness when you listen to that. And I was listening to a mantra every day last week. The Lakshmi mantra for financial abundance. And so I was listening to this every day in the morning during my meditation for about 20 minutes and singing along with it for about half of that time, and then just listening to it. And the background classic kind of sort of, you could call it psychedelic Indian spiritual sound, which is that, I forget the name of the instrument, Bill, like chime in if you remember, but it's not a sitar. But it's very, very popular. It's always used. It's kind of a drone sound.
Yeah, the bowed sort of
as if it's not.
It's not a didgeridoo. It's higher.
It's higher, but it has a low kind of quality and these high textures too. And it's if you heard it, you'd understand, and you'd recognize it immediately. Everyone hears it. It's the beginning of several of those Beatles songs, in their psychedelic times. And so, what is it with that? How did they know how to create that? I don't think I could think of how. Let's just go build a psychedelic instrument. What does that mean? Like, how did they know how to create that so specifically? Right? Like, that's such a.
And what pitch do you pick? I mean, when you've got one string, you're sitting there with a string and a bow. What string do you choose, or what tone do you choose? What timbre do you use for it? Getting them. You're right. It's there in everything. When you listen to Indian music, that drone is there.
Always, yeah.
And it's always, once you get over yourself and you decide that you can listen to it, right? There's that the cultural breakthrough you have to make. But once you do that, all of a sudden you're in the place and you're like, whoa, okay, there's something here, right? There's some meaning in this that's more obvious than just a pedal tone.
And so funny you say that, Bill, because I remember as a teenager hearing some form of Indian instrument in any song, and I immediately, and I'll fully admit it, I would immediately kind of like, I'm less interested now. That's just how I was as a teenager. I was more interested.
Right. I mean, we all are, right?
I wanted my rock and roll. I wanted whatever I was wanting at that time, right? And now, after my spiritual journey and everything like that, I hear Indian music and I'm like, oh, turn it up. Like, give me the good stuff, man. Like, I hear that instrument, I get so excited and intrigued, and I've done a complete 180 where now I'm like, if I hear that, I'm like, oh yeah, crank that up. Let's get some good vibes going here.
One of the tough things about music is when you bring all of your preconceptions to it.
And you're just missing out.
And all that the music is really asking is listen to me on terms, right?
Yeah.
And when you do that, everything changes. But it is a discipline. Like, for me to listen to modern classical music really takes effort, because there's a lot of it that is really difficult to get into. And if you're a big fan of 12-tone and other stuff that's out there right now, no, apologies, I'm not dissing on you or anything. It's just there's some barriers that are harder to cross than others. Mm-hmm. And that's really normal. Hey, at least you're showing up. If you want to make the effort and cross the barrier, you might find something you didn't know before. So, give yourself a little pat on the back. And
it's a musical experimentation. I think that's really important, to be able to keep that open mind, listening to new music that, you may not think is going to be that entertaining for yourself, but see where it takes you and see where you go with that music, and just be open to that experience, be open to it taking you to wherever it's meant to take you. And a lot of the times I find being a captive audience is usually the best in that situation, meaning you're maybe traveling somewhere and you experience local music and you're not really going to leave where you are at that moment. So you're kind of there and it's just going to happen. Those are typically the best, because you can't really tune out of that and you have to kind of be there to experiencing it. But maybe any final thoughts on our historical / kind of all over the place discussion?
Oh man, sometimes I wish it was just simpler. Let's go back to the Stone Ages, man, without all this technology.
Yep. I think the best middle ground is to kind of create our own Stone Age in the current age.
Well said. I like that. I mean, we can take the best and leave the rest.
Let's do it. I love right now that you and me can talk. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and you are in San Diego, California, USA, right? So
yeah,
that's pretty cool that we can do this. We've yet to meet in person. So I'm very grateful for technology for these situations. There's a lot of great stuff with our current situation today. And there's beautiful things from the past that we really need to be integrating back into our day-to-day lives. So yeah, let's bring the Stone Age into the current age and fuse the best of both,
Yeah, we are. We're bringing although it's going to be called the Stoned Age.
It already is. Yeah, that's the multi-stoned age. I love it. Well, That's it's always a pleasure, Bill. I appreciate these conversations as always. They fill up my cup every week.
Likewise, Chris. I don't know what I'd do with a Monday if we didn't have this chat. It really launches the week.
That's awesome. I'm really glad to meet you all. It's great.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation and for taking time to show your appreciation with a like, share, or subscribe. Discussions of Music, Healing, and Consciousness is a practice of spontaneity, and we welcome your comments, ideas, and questions. There are ways to connect with us in the show notes, so let us hear from you. Until next time, this is Bill Protzman along with Chris Noble wishing you great musical health. Samara Huchaya.